this to me is like the really fascinating material.
We don't know what the answer is, but we're looking for patterns.
I think we're looking at kind of a type of cosmic alchemy.
The story slowly grew into business.
But still, a lot of people don't know that this technology actually exists.
The possibilities here are pretty mind-boggling.
We can't just believe that it was the work of these lone troubled individuals.
Hey guys, the gang is all here.
It's all of us. Yay.
Yo.
Yeah, Rob is back. Did you survive your festival season yet?
I'm on intermission between festivals, actually. We got another one next week, but yes, I'm doing good. If you had asked me last week, I would have said, no, go away. Don't talk to me. I'm going back to bed.
Yeah, you absolutely would. But you also did play with your 80s cover band 2 nights last week.
3 nights. We practiced, then we had 2
that's
gigs.
right. They just about killed you, man. So.
It was good. It was fun, though.
Yeah. Sergio,
Yes.
we're back in Studio A.
We are back
Don't
in
have the
Studio
stress
A.
of
I'm
recording.
very thankful for Rob to take back over the producer duties because it's a lot of work, you guys.
You did great.
Rob.
You did a great job, though. Last
Thank
week's
you.
episode sounded wonderful.
I hope you all like the new theme song as well. It's produced by myself.
Yeah. It really is good. It's got that kind of like Giorgio Moroder kind of feel with a little bit of
it's like the Chase mixed with some Blue Monday, I think.
I love. Did that inspire you going to see Peter Hook and the Light?
Yeah, that was great, man.
Awesome, dude. Awesome. Well, guys, we have the guest on the line. And I'm really excited about this guest because back in 2001, I saw a movie that has been pretty instrumental in bringing me to do this podcast and really kind of got me re-interested into just the weird Forteana and strange events and all this kind of stuff that we talk about on a pretty much weekly basis on this show. And we're privileged tonight to have the screenwriter of that movie, which the film is Mothman Prophecies. And the screenwriter is Richard Hatem. Richard, welcome to Conspirinormal.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to be here. I love your show, and, we all love the same stuff, so we're going to have some fun.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. I just kind of wanted to get a little bit of your background as a screenwriter, some of the stuff that you've worked on, because we understand that not only did you write Mothman Prophecies, but you also did Under Siege 2.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, I did. That was, I'll give you like a quick, I don't know if it's quick, but I'll give you sort of the history. I knew, when I started out, when I was young, as a child, I was on the one hand, probably like you guys, pretty fascinated with UFOs, Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, ghosts, things like that. But I'm guessing I'm a little older than you guys because I was growing up in the 70s. So I was watching shows like In Search Of. Does that ring a bell?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. I'm the oldest one in this group. I'm 41. But I do remember watching In Search Of, like on reruns. Unsolved Mysteries was bigger for me.
Yeah, me too.
That's so funny. Okay, so that's when I'm learning that Unsolved Mysteries was kind of the way in for like the next generation after me. So you're 41. I'm a decade older than you. I'm 51.
Okay.
And so, back in my day, it was pretty much In Search Of and Kolchak the Night Stalker. And so that's what you had. One was real, one was not, but it didn't matter. They both dealt with monsters and scary stuff. And so that's, my generation grew up with that. But it all sort of came together in high school when I decided, okay, you know what, I think I want to write. And at that point I wanted to write for television. And that was around 1983. And that was when I saw the A-Team for the first time. And I thought, oh my God, finally television has created the perfect show.
Hell yeah.
I remember the A-Team real well.
Right. So, I mean, you know, it was the perfect, certainly the perfect show for, you know, a little 16-year-old Richie Hatem. So I got real excited and I said, I'm going to write an episode of the A-Team. So in my junior year of high school, every day after school, I would go home for about a month and a half and work on my script. And I wrote a script. And that was the beginning of, hey, I'm going to write and I'm going to, you know, sell stuff. And this is what I'm going to do for a living. And then, of course, but, you know, to sort of, you know, keep the theme going, you know, my favorite writer was Stephen King, hugely influential. So now I'm continuing on. I go to USC Film School. I meet one of my best friends, who I've, you know, been best friends with for 30 years, a guy named Matt Reeves, who you might know as a director. He did the last couple Planet of the Apes movies, and he did Cloverfield.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Oh, Cloverfield, nice. Yeah.
Yeah, so we met in college, and right after college, we, you know, were hanging around trying to get our careers started, and we were, you know, broke and having no success, and we decided, let's write a movie. So, you know, the smart thing you do when you want to write a movie is you go to Blockbuster Video and you just walk up and down the aisles going, what movies did we like? And we found Die Hard, and we're like, oh, well, this is clearly the greatest movie that's ever been made.
That's fair.
Yeah. You know, so how can we write a movie as good as this? Oh, I know. We'll put it on a train. So then we spent the next year basically trying to write our version of Die Hard on a train. And it was not, we weren't doing it cynically. We were doing it, I mean, with pure hearts full of love for Die Hard and hoping that we could, you know, get within 100 miles of its brilliance. So we wrote this movie, and then eventually it sold to Warner Brothers. This was a few years down the line. And then they bought it expressly to make a sequel to Under Siege. So, you know, of course, we were hoping for Harrison Ford or Bruce Willis, and we got Steven Seagal. And of course, no complaints. It got the movie made, but that was sort of that was how Under Siege 2: Dark Territory happened.
So the movie came out in 95. So how long did it take to get produced from the time that you guys wrote it until then? How long did it take you?
Okay. Oh, good question. Okay, so we started writing it in the summer of 1989, and then we dropped it for a while because Matt went back to graduate school at USC. I did not go to graduate school. So he continued. He got busy. Then we continued writing and finished the script in the fall of 1990. In the spring of 91, the script was optioned by a couple of very young producers who said that they were going to make the movie with Japanese money. They were going to get they were going to get funds from TDK, which was a company that made cassette tapes. And they were going to but there was money to make a movie, but it was not a lot. So that deal fell through. But as they were trying to do that, they met another producer, a guy by the name of Gary Goldstein. He was J.F. Lawton's manager, and J.F. Lawton is the screenwriter who wrote the original Under Siege. So Gary Goldstein, being both that guy's manager and now a movie producer based on the fact that Under Siege was made, they crossed paths, and Gary Goldstein found out, oh, this is a script that is in that vein, that sort of Die Hard Under Siege vein. So he met with us. We did some rewrites. Now we're probably in fall of 92, coming into early 1993. Gary Goldstein came in and said, hey, I brought you Under Siege, and now I'm bringing you a movie that could be Under Siege 2. It's this script by these two young kids who don't have any produced credits. And why don't you take a look? So in the first half of 1993, Warner Brothers read our script and liked it and bought it. Now, what they did then, they had 3 movies that could possibly be Under Siege 2. They had one that they had already hired somebody in-house to write, and they had another script that had come across their desks that could work, and they had ours. So they gave all 3 scripts to Steven Seagal. And they said, Steven, here are 3 movies, 3 scripts we think might make a good Under Siege 2. He read them all, and he didn't choose ours. And Warner Brothers said, yeah, you know what? Screw you. You're going to do this one over here. And they made him do our script, which was fantastic. and that's how it came to be made. That all took place in 93. They filmed it in 94, and the movie came out in 95.
Yeah, because as I understand it, it does take a long time to get a movie produced. And I understand it too. Like some scripts, there are still scripts out there that I guess, I don't know what, I was listening to some podcast or something, and like there's all these scripts that are just, that have been around for years that people still shop around.
Yeah. Well, there was a thing going on in the late 80s and early 90s where studios were buying a lot of what we call spec scripts, which just means if someone sits down and just writes a movie and tries to sell it, if it's got a cool idea. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, a lot of studios would pay big money just because it had a cool idea. And they sort of felt, well, we can fix it. We can hire a more experienced writer to kind of, fix it up the way we want. We'll give them notes. But there was what we call a big spec market. And that's what Matt Reeves and I were hoping to ride. We were hoping to make a $1 million sale, which we didn't, but we were lucky in that even though the movie didn't sell for a lot of money, and when I say movie, I mean script, even though the script didn't sell for a lot of money, it actually got made. And 99 out of 100 of these scripts never got made into movies. So the fact that it actually got produced was wildly lucky for us.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how it happened. Now, since then, the feature film industry has changed, and they're not buying things as voraciously as they were 20 years ago. Now, if you want to break into writing in Hollywood, you're better off writing a pilot, just creating a show and writing the first episode and hoping someone gets interested, because there's so many networks and so many outlets that are looking for material. But that's how we got in. And then so that script was written, under, Dark Territory, which became Under Siege 2 Dark Territory. And then Matt went off and started his directing career. And so then I continued writing on my own. And after a few scripts that were good but didn't really go anywhere, I decided, I don't know if I decided, I sort of became obsessed with a particular idea. And that idea led to the Mothman Prophecies.
I did see too that he did Let Me In as well, which that's a great movie. I don't know if any of the other guys have seen it.
The vampire one?
Yeah, it's a vampire one.
Yeah, that was an adaptation from a foreign film, right?
Like a Swedish movie. Yeah.
Yeah, the Swedish movie was called Let the Right One In, and then Matt's version that he wrote and directed was called Let Me In. And I'd argue it surpasses the original, but everyone should see both and decide.
Yeah, very, very good movie. Like it kind of looks, it kind of like depicts a toxic relationship. That's what I got out of it.
Very, very original take on the whole vampire thing. You know.
Yeah, a toxic relationship among 12-year-olds.
Yeah.
Right. So with actually, I want to ask you this before we kind of go into Mothman Prophecies. What kind of writers, because you mentioned Stephen King, but were there any television or movie writers that kind of specifically inspired you?
Oh, absolutely. My biggest inspiration in television was a writer by the name of Stephen J. Cannell. And I don't know if you know who he is, but I'll tell you that he created The Rockford Files, The Greatest American Hero, The A-Team.
Uh-huh.
And these were shows that when I was young, and I sort of discovered they really influenced me because they were sort of crime stories or action stories, but they had humor. Obviously, the Rockford Files, you have James Garner, and then the A-Team had a lot of humor too. And those were things that were like, oh my God, action movies can be funny. And television shows with sort of crime stories can also be funny. And so that voice really captured me. So as far as TV was concerned, Stephen J. Cannell was far and away the biggest influence on me, which is weird because I haven't really gone on to do that really. I've gone on to do more supernatural kind of stuff. But I that's always in the back of my head. How can I make these characters more human by showing that they have a sense of humor? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I also noticed that you have written a couple of episodes, or maybe more than that, of Supernatural, which is one of my favorite shows,
right.
Although I haven't followed it in a while.
Well, my God, you have a life.
The thing is up to like
years on.
Yeah.
They've made 9,000 episodes. What are you going to do? I was on Supernatural really, really early on. I was only on the first season, and frankly, that show has sort of fulfilled the promise. It's funny. People are always trying to kind of connect the horror dots, like, and usually they start with Kolchak the Night Stalker in the 70s. And then in the 80s, there really wasn't much. But then in the 90s, you had the X-Files. And then in 2005, you had Supernatural. And those are sort of the big high water marks in terms of TV horror. And then I would sort of make a slight detour to add in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which has been hugely influential for a whole generation of young people coming up and deciding, hey, TV can be really special. I want to write a show like this. There's a lot of people I work with who are much younger than me who cite Buffy the Vampire Slayer as their number one show of all time.
Which episodes did you write for Supernatural?
I wrote The Phantom Traveler, which was episode number 4.
Okay. First season.
And then I wrote first season. And then I wrote Asylum, which is episode number 10. I think it's episode number 10. Yeah.
Okay.
So those are my two. The one where Dean is afraid to fly, which was great because that was like I was so happy to write that episode because it's like even early on, we've established that these guys are, badass and brave and they're not afraid of the things that we would be terrified of. So, but Dean, one of them's got to be afraid of something. And I'm like, oh, well, Dean should be like me. He should have a real problem with flying. And so based on that, we came up with Phantom Traveler.
Kind of bringing it to your like personal things into the story. That's interesting. I like it when writers do that. I'm always like looking at different shows because like to me, when I watch a TV show now, it's the writing that really does it for me. Like, Walking Dead is a good example because I think that when it's good, it's good. When it's not, it's not. But I think that there's some parts of that show where the writers that really understand looking into like literature or tragedy or comedy, kind of pulling from that kind of education. I really appreciate that what writers do.
You're 100% correct. And I think all writers are always best served by realizing that we're working in a medium that we didn't invent yesterday. It's been around for thousands of years, and using things that, stories, characters, structures, following the hero's journey. Right. That stuff never gets old. I mean, amazingly enough, if I find myself when I'm trying to explain what I mean by the hero's journey nowadays, I immediately talk about Harry Potter because it's probably the most brilliant rendering of a true hero's journey that obviously goes all the way back to Gilgamesh in the modern era. And it's no surprise that it is a literary phenomenon, a film phenomenon, and people don't even know why they're reacting to it so strongly. But it's because when someone is called out of normal life and told you're special and there's something you need to do and you may not survive, but you have to do it anyway, there is no greater beginning of a story. Everyone responds to it. You can dress it up any way you want. Those are the stories we flock to. I mean, if you go back 30 years, you talk about Star Wars. It's the same thing.
All the Joseph Campbell stuff, right?
Totally. Yeah. And it's not even, it's not math. You don't go back and read Joseph Campbell and go, okay, 1 + 1 = 2. Okay, done. Obviously J.K. Rowling brings a tremendous amount of imagination and talent to what she does. George Lucas brought it to what he does. And everyone who does, Ian Fleming brought it to James Bond, and Lawrence Kasdan and Steven Spielberg brought it to Indiana Jones. But these are the stories that strike so deep into the heart of something subconscious in human beings that they will always get attention.
I also like it when writers, because I'm a big fan of the old Twilight Zone as well. I'm a big fan of.
Oh, God bless you, sir. I couldn't agree more.
Absolutely, I'm a big fan of Serling and his work, and those shows, science fiction, and the Twilight Zone. It was a way to bring these kind of really almost taboo social subjects and put them in that science fiction genre. And my favorite episode of that is the monsters are loose on Maple Street or something like that.
Oh God. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And it's all basically about McCarthyism and communism and the mass fear and mass panic. And what Star Trek did too was also revolutionary for its time. Some of their episodes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the Twilight Zone is kind of a miracle. The fact that it happened the way it happened when it happened, because Rod Serling didn't want to do genre. He had no interest in science fiction or horror at all. He was a pretty straightforward drama writer, and his hero was Paddy Chayefsky, who wrote Network and Marty.
Another brilliant writer.
Yeah, but Rod Serling just wanted to be, a serious drama writer and win a bunch of movies and smoke a lot of cigarettes. Jesus Christ, that guy smoked.
Yeah, he died of lung cancer.
Yeah. No. He actually died on the table in heart surgery, but almost the same thing.
Yeah.
He's But they were like, no, we don't want to watch some drama. Can't you do something kind of weird? And he discovered what the Soviets discovered, 50, 60 years earlier, which is if you say it's a fairy tale, if you dress it up like it's science fiction, you get to tell the truth and no one will ever stop you. Mm-hmm. So he got to say things about race and class and about the human heart that he would not have been allowed to do. The censors would have been all over him, but because it's a Martian doing something or it's somebody on a distant planet, well, they never saw it. And they just thought, oh, well, this is just a fanciful story. And so he was able to make so many brilliant points about the way human beings are. And I don't even think he knew it until he got into it. And suddenly he was like, oh my God, they're letting me loose in the candy store and no one's going to stop me. I can do whatever the fuck I want.
Yeah.
And that's when he really went to town, and he really did. And people loved it. And they were able, in a way we're not able today as much. I mean, Black Mirror notwithstanding, people were happy to get a half-hour story because this was a time in American history when there were magazines that printed short stories. So people were used to ingesting short form, beginning, middle, end drama in a way that right now is not really in vogue, certainly not in television. In television, we're doing the television version of novels. Game of Thrones, which of course is a novel, but what everybody wants when they're watching TV is 13 seasons of one giant story.
The whole golden age,
or at least
of television
elements
stuff,
of a giant
yeah.
story, you know?
Yeah.
Walking Dead.
So you would more like kind of like the anthology format than say that like continuous, the serialization that is now very popular.
You know, it's weird. I love them both, but I will say that my first show that I got on TV, which was in 2003, I think, on ABC, was a show called Miracles, which was unfortunately titled because it made it sound like it was about religion when it really wasn't. It was more about paranormal phenomenon seen from a particular point of view, or a couple points of view. But anyway, when I look back at it, those shows were very episodic. We were doing one-offs. It was just like, in this episode, this is the story that happens. We had very little, I think, in the way of overarching mythology, the way maybe the X-Files did, or, you know, even Buffy. But those were, but that show Miracles, we only did 13 of them, but those were really cool. I mean, they weren't Twilight Zone, but in a way they were. They were just enclosed stories of strange, puzzling, paranormal phenomenon that our main characters were trying to sort out. And it kind of came out really cool. So, you know, maybe you're right. Maybe episodic and anthology is my true heart.
Just as an aside, we were talking about Serling. There's an interesting interview that he did in 1959, and it's on YouTube, where he's talking to Mike Wallace. And this is right before Twilight Zone premiered. And he was talking about, because he'd been on Playhouse 90 back in the days of like live dramatic television. And he was talking about how he was really frustrated with some of the censors. And he talked about how the Lassie show, which was this innocent show, but people got all up in arms because they described Lassie as being pregnant or something in one episode. Of course, this is 1950s America. But he said that, and you could really see how he eventually transitioned this to the Twilight Zone, where they did a production of Judgment in Nuremberg. And of course, there's a description in there about people being turned into soap, just as part of the narrative, the descriptions.
Right.
And but the problem was they had to take all that out because it was a soap company that was sponsoring
That's just bad timing, I guess.
So he was just frustrated with that because to him that killed the effectiveness of the story, that he had to change that just to make this corporation happy, basically.
Oh my God, that is the greatest thing ever. Oh my God, that's so beautiful.
Yeah, it's there on YouTube. I mean, it's a great interview with him. But
you know, it's funny. I think I've seen that interview, and I think they're both smoking. I swear to God, it looks like they're on a street corner in London.
Yeah, it's totally different times. But let's talk about your feature film work. And of course, the main thing is Mothman Prophecies, because we're going to get into the weirdness here.
Yeah.
What got you into wanting to do the Mothman Prophecies as a film?
Well, I had been, my whole life, I've been reading books about, like I said, UFOs, Bigfoot, all that kind of stuff. And, well, I mean, as you guys well know, there's like sub-classifications, even in UFO literature. There's sort of the disclosure books and the, Roswell crash discs, alien bodies being hidden from people. It's sort of, there's that angle. And then sort of off to the side, you've got the contactee books. But then off to the third side, you kind of just got stories about people going, hey, so we were all camping this one night and this weird thing happened.
Uh-huh.
And that category is my favorite category. Hey, we were just living our normal lives when something weird happened, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
The weird stuff is the best stuff. The high strangeness is the best
The
stuff.
high strangeness, right?
Yeah.
Because that's the one that you can really get in, because that's like, oh shit, that could happen to me. Like, I go camping, I walk my dog at 10 o'clock at night, like, and I could, suddenly, see something weird, and I always loved that. And those stories always had a beginning and a little bit of a middle, but no end. It was always just, I was out walking one night. Here's the weird thing that happened. That's all. And I'm like, that's amazing. That feeling that it gives me is amazing. The feeling that there's something else operating in the world that we don't know about and we can barely see. We catch only in glimpses. I'm like, I wish I could write about that feeling. I wish I could write about those questions. And I'm like, well, let me look at some of these, let me go back to all the movies I've ever seen. And I went back and watched movies, and, I watched The Exorcist, and I watched The Changeling. And all of those movies sort of had an end point, like especially The Changeling. The Changeling was, like, the first half was great. George C. Scott moves into a house, and it's haunted. And all of those scenes are great. And they do a scene of automatic writing. Someone comes in, and there's a ghost in the house, and it's really cool and scary. But then suddenly it becomes kind of a political mystery. It's like, oh, wait a second, there was a murder here. And then we found the bones, and now we have to go find the murderer. And I don't mean to criticize The Changeling, but suddenly it becomes Scooby-Doo. It becomes, we've got to find out who's doing all this. And then they find out that Melvin Douglas murdered somebody, and, whatever, and it's over. And so
Supernatural
many movies,
detective story.
right. It's like a ghost is only showing up to, like, work the night shift of the local cops and kind of help out with some investigatory moves. And then once they figure out, once they put the guy in jail, then the ghost recedes and goes away. And I'm like, that never happens. That is that is the most vanishingly rare of all supernatural stories, the one that actually makes narrative sense. So now I'm like, oh, God damn it, what am I going to do? It's like, I want to write a story about a guy who moves into a haunted house like George C. Scott. It's haunted. He tries to figure out what the fuck is going on, and he never figures it out. The end.
Right.
And then I'm like, well, but, I've worked in Hollywood, and that's, you can't do that. That's never going to work. There's got to be some kind of ending. There's got to be some sort of feeling of, well, there was an answer. And I'm like, how can we make the answer unexpected? So I'm ruminating on this for months. Okay. Now, let me talk about the synchronicity. And I think you're referring to a story about how I sort of couldn't sleep one night and woke up in the middle of the night and drove to a bookstore and found the Mothman Prophecies, right?
Yes, we had Lauren Coleman on not too long ago, and he was relating some of that. He actually talks a little bit about this in his latest book about Mothman.
Right. Well, that story is basically true, but not 100% true. So for our purposes, let's just say I was in a bookstore and I found the Mothman Prophecies, and it was not a book I was aware of at all. Okay. And I, picked it up and read the back and went, oh shit, this sounds amazing. I as far as I know, I'd never even heard of John Keel. Took the book home. This is now March of 1997.
Okay.
Yeah, 97. Okay. So I take the book home, read it, and it's John Keel, which means it's amazing. Have you guys read John Keel's books?
I've read the Mothman Prophecies. I haven't read any of the other books, but I have read that one. Incidentally enough, I have the film edition of the Mothman Prophecies.
Oh, okay. So, well, I read the book. He's, I think, a wonderful writer and really, really entertaining. And I read the book and I was like, I friggin' love this book. It is incomprehensible. there's no story here. It's episodic. It's all over the place. There's all kinds of manifestations and weird paranormal things going on. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, no, you know what? There is a story here. Here's the story. Guy goes to a town, a lot of weird stuff going on in the town, tries to figure it out, tries really, really hard to figure it out, tries so hard that the phenomenon notices that he's trying really hard. Phenomena starts to with him. He goes a little bit crazy, and then he thinks he has the answer, and he's wrong. I'm like, that's really fucking interesting. That's interesting. That feels real to me. That the more you look at this particular stuff, the more you get spun around in circles. And I don't know if you guys, the people you've spoken to in your own personal research has borne this out, but I feel that that's a pretty good representation of the real story of trying to figure this shit out.
It is.
Absolutely.
It is. It really
so,
is.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And so I'm like, well, okay, so what do we do? So that was March of 1997. So that summer, I was going to New Mexico. I was going to be in Taos, New Mexico for all of August. So I was like, okay, so here's what I'm going to do. The minute I land in Taos, New Mexico, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to start working on this. And it was a little rented house. And I set up a little writing station in this one guest room by a window that overlooked this giant sunflower that was always covered in bees. And I was looking out across the desert. I mean, it was the perfect place to write the Mothman Prophecies. And while I was in New Mexico, I went to a bookstore, and lo and behold, I found Operation Trojan Horse, which was another John Keel book, which had also been republished because Illuminate Press had republished some of these books in 96, I think. And so I found Operation Trojan Horse, and then I also found a book called They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers by Albert Bender.
Yeah, Bender. Mm-hmm.
And these were, yeah. You know who you guys know who that is, right?
Yeah, I know who. But yeah, we know who Bender is. Yeah, also the author of, was it the UFOs and the Three Men or something like that?
Yeah. I think that's right. That's right. Yeah. And so I got those books and I started reading them too, and all of those books influenced how I was thinking. And but the thing that I was bumping up against was, I'm really into UFOs. I'm really into this stuff, but I don't know if the average person is. So how do I make this not just about a guy obsessing about UFOs? And so the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, it's got to be personal. Because again, when you're writing, the best thing you can do is make something personal. I'll give you an example. You can have a cop movie about a cop hunting a serial killer who kills women, right? Or you can have a movie about a cop who's hunting serial killers, or a serial killer who kills women, and that cop, his wife got murdered 10 years ago, and it's never been solved.
So it becomes intensely personal.
It's intensely personal. You can do a TV show about a guy who works in the basement at the FBI investigating weird shit and UFOs, or you can do a show just like that, but that guy, his sister disappeared when he was a little boy into a UFO. Now it's personal. So that's always the best approach. So when I wrote this script, I decided to add some sort of a personal story that did not exist in real life. John Keel was never married. But I'm like, you know what? Everyone understands when something really scary and out of nowhere happens in their life. But usually it's a disease or a car accident. So I'm like, okay, let's give our guy that background. Let's give him a wife who who suddenly, he's got the perfect life. And then his wife dies of an undiagnosed brain tumor, and she's gone. And he's never quite able to kind of get past that sort of cruel cosmic injustice. And I felt, that will naturally put him in a place that when weird things start to happen, emotionally, it's kind of the same thing. It's like going to a seance or a medium to try to contact a dead loved one. It's coming from the same place. It's like, what do I not understand? I was never given the instruction book for life. What page is missing about why people die and what happens afterwards?
Yes.
So everything that John Klein, Richard Gere's character, experiences in the Mothman Prophecies is sort of served on a plate of personal grief and despair and questioning. And that sort of gives some emotional heft to him trying to solve this mystery. The mystery he's really trying to solve is, why did my wife die? And that's a mystery I think everyone is trying to solve. Why does anyone close to us die, and why, and then what happens afterwards? But ultimately, it is a fruitless journey because it can only take you so far. You'll never get the answer you want. Asking why a tragedy happens to you will never provide you with an answer that's satisfactory. And in the same way, he will never be able to solve the mystery of the Mothman or any of the strange things happening in Point Pleasant. The further he goes down that road, that way madness lies. And the cool thing is all that stuff was in the book. But now I had a vehicle through which to present it emotionally to an audience. And ultimately, I know you guys have seen the movie, but at the very end, when the, whoever it is beyond the veil who's trying to with him finally dangles the most desirable fruit and says, "Hey, we got your wife on the line. You want to talk to her?" And he wants that more than anything. But that's the moment when someone says to him, "Stop it. Stop. You're going to drive yourself crazy. Stop letting them run the show. Ignore it and just be a human being. Come spend Christmas in Point Pleasant with Laura Linney."
That's not so bad.
Yeah, that could work out okay. It's Laura Linney. And then that's what he does. And the minute he does that, everything clicks into place. And so it took a while to sort of figure that out. But I'm like, you know what? That's a legitimate story. So in Taos, New Mexico, that was the beginning of writing that story.
What's interesting to me, I've watched this movie probably like 20 times. I think I saw it like two times in the theater. It was just that good. And I bought the movie and I've watched it a lot since. And
you're my hero.
Even if I still have it and it's on TV, I'll still sit down and watch it because it is a very compelling movie. But because we can kind of talk about the nature of the entities involved in the film, which are very similar to other entities and real cases and the case that it's based on. But I always felt like the end of the movie where they dangle the wife in front of him almost made them kind of evil, if just not downright shitheads. You know what I mean? Because it's like obviously, because like even, Laura Linney's character, she says, whoever that is on the other end of the phone, that's not your wife. Right. It might sound like your wife, but that's not her.
Very sinister move.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, have you read a book? And at the time I had not read this book. I actually read it a few years after the movie came out, but you got to read a book, by wait, hang on one second. Wait, hang on one second. I'm running over to my bookshelf. Hang on.
Good.
Oh, here it is. Okay, I got the book. Okay, here's what you got to read. Hungry Ghosts by Joe Fisher. Have you read this book?
No.
It is wonderful. The foreword is by Colin Wilson, who is my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
And this book will scare the hell out of you, and no one's read it. And it's amazing. Here's what it's about really quickly. It's a guy in Toronto, a reporter, doing a feature story on mediums and channelers, goes to a channeler. Channeler begins channeling an old lover of his from centuries past in Greece, in one of his past lives. Every week, this guy keeps going back to talk to this woman that was supposedly his lover hundreds of years ago. And he becomes a little obsessed. This is a book about a certain kind of spirit that tries to draw you in and then gets really pissed off if you try to go away. And it's all true. You've got to read Hungry Ghosts by Joe Fisher. And it was republished as The Siren Call of the Hungry Ghosts. And you can get it in paperback. Read it this weekend. You will not put it down. So, the ghosts are assholes. You're completely correct.
Or whatever.
Those lower level spirits,
yeah.
If they, and again, if you believe any of this stuff at all, the lower level spirits, they just want your attention. And once you start listening, they do not want you to stop. And I think that's what Indrid Cold was all about.
Yeah. And that brings me to just the subject of Indrid Cold. Now, the way that it's portrayed in the film, I think is a little bit different than actually that Kill describes it, because Indrid Cold in the actual events, Woody Derenberger, I think, was the name. And I think that Gordon Smallwood character is kind of based off him a little bit.
100%.
But Indrid Cold was almost more like this classic contact T creature, like what Adamski, or we were talking a little bit about Van Tassel a little bit before the show, that somebody that they would encounter. But Indrid Cold in the film is he almost becomes this spokesperson for all the entities that are around. And I mean, that's my favorite scene in the film. It still gives me goosebumps to this day.
When he's on the phone, right?
Right.
Yeah. I got to tell you, I mean, it is an absolute pleasure and a miracle to hear a person say that, because I will tell you that 21 years ago, sitting in a coffee house in Pasadena, writing that scene and thinking to myself, this is the creepiest thing in the world. Is anyone going to get this? Is anyone going to feel that this is as creepy as I think? Because the scary thing about, the people who are communicating with John Keel and Indrid Cold, even when he, crossed paths with Woody Derenberger on the roadside, they try so hard to be normal and to be human and to not scare you. And that's the scariest thing of all.
Yeah.
Is their failed attempts to get the lingo down. And to me, that really creeped me out. In fact, I'll tell you something. I actually think they made it, there were a couple lines that got added in the movie that were not in the script. And one of them was, and it's maybe the only quibble I have with the movie, which I deeply love. I think Mark Pellington did such a beautiful job with that movie. But a line was added where Indrid Cold says on the phone, "I know what scares you." And that's the only false note, because that sounds demonic to me. And I think Indrid Cold isn't about that. I think Indrid Cold is about, hello, I am trying to be your friend. And and that's what makes him scary. I don't think they like. I wanted to present something that was scary, not because it was evil, but because it was foreign and unknowable.
Yes.
And alien in the truest sense of inhuman. And even in its attempts to be human, became only more, it's that uncanny valley, like when a face looks almost human, but not quite.
Keel writes about that in Mothman Prophecies 2, not in Respect to Indrid Cold, but to like the weird men in black that would come and visit people. And it was almost like they were just trying too hard to be human. Like it's very, very unsettling. Some of the parts where they're just, they're looking at ordinary everyday objects and they are just, they don't know what to do with them because they don't know what they are probably.
Yeah. I mean, do you ever think about that? Like, do you guys ever think, like, on some weird level, it's like, I wish a man in black would come to my house. I'd know exactly what to do.
I don't know.
I always have that. I'm like, as soon as a guy in a black suit shows up and asks for a glass of water, boom, I got him.
Yeah, here you go, buddy. Here's your water.
It's like, I don't know what I do, but it's like, I take a picture of him or I do something really smart. But it's funny because have you guys read another book called The Uninvited?
There's a book that I have read by that title that's more about a haunting episode.
But there's one, it's nonfiction and it's about like, it takes place in England.
Okay,
True
it's not
story.
the same book.
Oh, okay. Check out the wait. Again, well, hold on. I'll bring my phone over to the bookshelf. You guys gotta read these books. Okay, here we go. The Uninvited.
We're getting a list, Rob.
Yeah.
This is all I do. God forbid anyone ever come to my house. I'm like, come in my office. Let me show you my collection.
Well, you need to meet our friend Robert Guffey. He has quite a interesting, the same kind of like weird book collection as well.
Oh yeah? Oh my God. Yeah, I got it. Yeah, this version, and this also has been recently re-released. But this is called The Uninvited by Clive Harold. And it's not a really well-referenced book, but so it's kind of hard to tell how much creative license was taken. But when you read this is something that took place, I don't know, in 1977, and it's got everything. It's got UFOs, it's got men in black, it's got cattle mutilations, it's got stuff that if you know about Skinwalker Ranch, stuff that was happening on Skinwalker Ranch is described in this book in 1977. And this is like it takes place in South Wales. This book is really fun.
Yeah, there's all those weird places like that a bunch of just strange stuff happens. I think I've heard of something like that. There's an author that Keel I think might have mentioned, but Colin Wilson definitely did. Ted Holiday, and he talked a lot about Loch Ness, about Loch Ness, and it being a very strange, weird place like that as well.
Oh, really? And so he was sort of talking about the whole area being weird, not just the monster.
Right.
Interesting. Okay, right. I'll have to check that out.
Interesting thing about Loch Ness is that Aleister Crowley actually had he had his house there where he would do all kinds of weird rituals and yeah.
But here's the weird thing. It's like I've never heard of any UFO activity over Loch Ness. And doesn't that kind of seem to be like a natural? And yet I don't think I've ever heard of it. Have you?
No, I've never heard of it. But maybe some things take different forms at different places. But yeah, the UFO stuff does go hand in hand. Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, it seems like there should be all kinds of things going on in Loch Ness. But anyway, but yeah, Well, I'm so thrilled that the movie connected with you. It was always my fear that just sort of nobody would get it but me. And even though the movie was not, a giant box office hit by any means, the people who saw it and who connected with it, and who have told me about it, it did exactly what I hoped it would do, which is sort of throw light on the question, which for me is the fun part, not the answer, but the question, and to sort of always be in that place of questioning and never fall, sort of never fall into the trap of going, oh, you know what, this is all bullshit, and being total skeptic debunker. And then on the other hand, never fall into the other sort of, never drive into the other shoulder of the road, which is, oh, it's the ETH, they're here and they're reptilian and they're coming for us.
Right.
Try to see in the middle of the road and go, hey, we don't know yet. So let's just keep an open mind and see what happens.
It was really the first movie. And for me, it was one of those things that kind of put a bug in my ear to kind of change my opinion on the ETH hypothesis. And the whole idea of basically what would later, I think, Mac Tonys would call the ultra-terrestrials. Because basically that's what is described in that. Because, seeing the movie made me want to read the book. Later on, I picked up a copy of one of Colin Wilson's book called The Mammoth Book of the Unexplained, of which he talks a lot about that same kind of stuff, and he cites Keel and several other authors. But that's the scene. Another scene that I love is when he goes to talk to Leek, which, oddly enough, until I read Lauren Coleman's book, I did not realize that was Keel backwards.
Yeah, I'm a real genius.
But just that whole scene with Alan Bates, where we were talking about this, myself and Rob, where he says, what I know you know this because you wrote it, but he says, Richard Gere's character says, well, why don't they just come out and explain themselves? And Alan Bates' character says, you're more advanced than a cockroach. Have you ever tried to explain yourself to one of them? And I just love that whole concept.
That line has stuck with me since I first saw the movie, when it first came out. Like, I love that.
Oh, God bless you guys. I tell you, it couldn't make me happier that someone, that it lands on people, because that feels like the thing. I mean, that's always the question. It's like, well, why don't they land on the White House lawn? And why don't they just tell us what's going on? And it's because it's like, well, guys, they're not us. We're using us to try to understand them. We don't even know who they are, or where they're from, or what they are.
Maybe it is trying to talk to us as well as it can.
Yeah, it's like, how can we start placing expectations? All we can do is look at the phenomenon as it presents itself, and take a step back and try to take note of it, and try to resist the impulse to interpret too quickly. Mm-hmm. And when you interpret too quickly, you get religion.
Yeah, good point. It's interesting that you said that you wrote it and you started writing it around March 1997. And that was when the Heaven's Gate cult.
I think Phoenix Lights was that
and the
year
Phoenix
too.
Lights was around the same time. That was an interesting year. Did that have any inspiration for you, or was that kind of in your thought, in the back of your mind?
No, and only retrospectively have I made that connection. But to me, the Heaven's Gate cult was like, I didn't even register what that was. I'm like, no, that's some crazy thing in the news, and I didn't really register. And the Phoenix Lights, I didn't even know about for another couple of years for some reason. So it is strange to look back at that.
Yeah.
but it was fun. I mean, I read the book and I called my agent and I said, hey, there's this book called The Mothman Prophecies, and I'm pretty sure no one owns it, but could you check it out and find out if it's available if I wanted to sort of write a movie, using it? And so my agent called John Keel's agent. It was a real tough character named Knox Berger. And we heard this amazing story. And the story was this, that in the 70s, somebody called John Keel after the publication of the Mothman Prophecies, a friend of his from LA, and said, congratulations. And John Keel said, what are you talking about? And he's like, oh, they're making your book into a movie. Huh. And John's like, what are you talking about? He's like, oh, I was just, I drove by, I was speaking with a friend who knows a producer, and Sun Classic International is about to start filming it. They've already written a script. They had never gotten the rights. They had never spoken to John Keel. He knew nothing about it.
Mm.
Oh.
So Knox Berger landed on them like a 1,000,000-pound shit hammer and shut that down real quick. And ever since then, Keel had been very, very skeptical and cynical and wary of anything involving Hollywood. But, I wrote a letter to him, and then we spoke on the phone, and he's like, oh, this guy sounds like a decent guy. So they did allow us to option the book, which had to be done before I started doing anything. And then, so in the summer of 97, the option was purchased. And then throughout that fall, like I said, in August and then into September and October, and in November, I wrote the script. And then, and I don't think anyone was happier than John Keel when it sold, because suddenly a giant infusion of cash came to him, and like right when he needed it. He was living a pretty hand-to-mouth existence in New York. Yeah. And I think he was really grateful that at the end of his life, he finally got the attention that he kind of always wanted and was always hoping for. And so I'm glad that kind of worked out for him too.
What did he think of the film?
He really liked it. He didn't like the name John Klein, knowing that it was him. It was sort of like, John Klein, what's our name is that? But I'm like, look, he's, that's a name, and it's not your name, but it's got your initials. And so he's John Klein. But he was really pleased with it, and he was really excited about it. And look, this guy was a writer. He was selling stories to magazines in the 40s and 50s. And he as weird as his experiences were, he was a very practical guy, and he wanted to make a living. And he also wanted it to be known that the Mothman Prophecies was his book and something that he was inextricably tied to. And then they cast Richard Gere, and he's like, okay, well, at least they got a good likeness.
What was the was there a thought process behind setting it in the present day and not setting it in 67?
Yes, absolutely. I wanted it to feel real, and I wanted it to feel immediate. And let's be honest, the phenomena isn't specific to 67
sure.
or 66. It's always been, and it always will be. And these stories go on today. So I'm like, I'm not really lying or falsifying anything to say it's going on today. It is going on today. Maybe not these incidences, but yeah, I'm going to go ahead and update it. I'm doing everything else. Why confuse matters? Plus, I'm changing things. So I don't want people who have read the book to think this is going to be an absolutely faithful adaptation of a nonfiction work. This is using the events to say something about the phenomenon and about our reality. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And John Keel had no problem with it, thank God.
One interesting part of the film that has always stuck with me, well, several things obviously have stuck with me, but when Indrid Cold comes to Gordon Smallwood and he says, "Do not be afraid." And I love the sound. I love the soundtrack in the film where you hear the little electronic voice kind of saying, "Do not be afraid." Do not. That kind of sparked something in me where you can see that in the Bible, where the angels come to anybody, and usually the first thing they say is, "Do not be afraid."
Yep. Well, you pretty much just nailed it, didn't you?
So that was meant in the.
What? Well, what did they say to Whitley Strieber?
Yeah.
Is there anything we can do to make you stop screaming?
Yeah.
All right. So now just draw a line from 1985 with Whitley Strieber back to 1966 with, Woody Derenberger, all the way back to the Bible.
Right.
Is it the same thing? Are these people experiencing the same things and interpreting them using whatever cultural and psychological wherewithal they have at that moment in our human history? But is it the same thing? And I'm not talking about ancient astronauts. I'm talking about, I'm not sort of firing the arrow backward or firing the arrow from biblical times forward as much as I'm saying, let's just talk about human beings and how they try to describe when a strange thing happens to them, whether it was 2,000 years ago or 20 years ago or last night. And by the way, I'm stealing from Jeffrey Kripal and Whitley Strieber's latest book, The Supernatural. Have you read that one?
I have not, but I am familiar with it. I've heard them. I've heard a couple good interviews with them. Kripal is very interesting in the way that he looks at all this phenomenon.
I gotta do a deep dive on Kripal because I think that guy's a genius. But basically, Whitley tells his story. And then Kripal, being a professor of comparative religion, places it in context, both current and ancient, and says, when you're looking at this stuff, here's a way to look at it. That's what that book is about. It's about, here's a way to look at this sort of phenomenon, and again, it's like, take a step back from interpretation. Listen, compare, but don't immediately take anything for granted or at face value. And I think you just did that in such a beautiful way by saying in the Bible, it's like, do not be afraid.
Yeah.
Because of course you're going to be afraid. And when something that is of another classification, that is not human, interacts with you, I will give them this. At least most of them know to say, don't be afraid, because they know we're going to be afraid.
Which, of course, has the opposite effect.
I know, but you can't blame them. Again,
yeah.
What are you going to do? We're cockroaches. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Where I want to go from here, because there's a lot to this. You mentioned that when people interpret it, that religions will come out of it. So are we dealing with something that is completely random in nature, or that has its own agenda and it's all about how we interpret it? Because, Keel in the book, he makes this statement that he felt like what he was dealing with was like a skipping record that was just on repeat forever, that it was just saying the same thing over and over again. Like, he gets real frustrated with the phenomenon at one point.
Yeah. Yeah. Look at the way it's actually played out. Has any contactee, has anyone in a seance ever gotten good information?
I guess
No.
it would. Yeah. Well, I guess it might depend on interpretation, but yeah, I think for the most part, no.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it and say that these, you know, this exterior voice, if it is indeed an exterior voice, if they're really here for some agendized purpose, they certainly have the ability to do it. They're communicating in a certain way. But when you get down to the actual details, it's never been useful information, really. And that's either a problem in translation or it was never the point. Or there is a point that we do not yet comprehend, which may be the truth. I mean, I think all you can say is that if you get rid of the notion that people, experiencers who have had experiences, thus the name, if you do not believe they are lying or crazy or deluded, and if you just go, you know what, you had an experience, how would you describe the experience that you had? And you take the breadth of those experiences, which have gone on forever, but which, you know, we have a lot of stories in the last 120 years. What do we get? We get a message of there is something, but we don't know what it is, and it defies our attempts to explain it. I think those are three things we do come away with.
Yes.
And right now, those are the only three cards we're holding. So if people are serious about research, I say you focus on the experiencers. And again, without rushing to any kind of a judgment, and certainly not rushing to a judgment of, are they crazy or lying? Look at what they're saying. Look at it across the reports. See if you can sort of figure out commonalities and begin research there. But you know what? I'm not even sure how far that's going to get you.
Yeah, that's true.
Very good articulation of that.
It's definitely true that we are dealing with something that is probably unknowable. And we were talking a little bit about Greg Bishop before. Are you sure you're familiar with his co-creation theory? That we have like a part in the contact experience too, where these beings will show us what they think we want to see.
Yeah, something culturally contextual.
100%. I mean, I do think there's a lot to be said for that, because that's the only equipment we have, our own brains. And even the mediums, you know, of the 1850s and all the way through into the 1920s and modern day, the good ones acknowledge that it's like, look, this is coming through me, my instrument. So a little bit's going to get lost in translation because we're dealing with my physical brain. And so a little bit of what you're hearing, unfortunately, is going to be filtered through me. So I am the co-creator. And I think that's an aspect of what Greg is talking about. And I think that's right on the money. What do you think?
I believe it to be true as well. I have definitely had a journey with this stuff too. I mean, I've gone from where when I grew up, it was kind of like, it's all flesh and blood craft, the nuts and bolts and flesh and blood aliens, and the aliens are here, man. They're coming to save us and all that kind of stuff. And I've gone through the phase where I believe that it was all a demonic manifestation. But then lately, through a lot of different influences, I definitely see it as that there is just a random aspect to this stuff, and that there's just an unknowable aspect to this stuff that has nothing to do with belief systems. It's just kind of maybe it's like you said in the film, through Alan Bates' character. It's just like they've always been here. And I believe that to be true. I think this is a natural thing. I mean, we were making a joke earlier about mushrooms, but the big thing for me on all this was finding out that people that had alien abduction experiences were basically seeing the same thing that people were seeing on ayahuasca trips. The experiences were incredibly similar. So I'm just like, that to me was like the clincher of how can you say that this is external? It has to be something that's internal, that they are communicating with us somehow. And in the ayahuasca stuff, people come out of that with their lives fundamentally changed, and it becomes a religious experience. And the other aspect to it, going kind of back to the demons or angels aspect, that this really fundamentally, this phenomenon is basic religious experience. I mean, if you take, what was her name? Betty Andreasson, that case, it was full of Christian imagery because she was a Christian, or is. And
right.
But if you look at that case, you're just like, how could this be? These guys from Zeta Reticuli is like, this is religious experience. And I think just now in this time, guys like Kreipel and some other people are beginning to look at this material and say, this is what this is. They're taking it out of the tabloid realm and the silly realm and saying, we need to start taking this seriously. Like John Mack, I think, was kind of the start of that as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think personally, I'm getting to the point where I'm not so sure if this is as external per se, if not more psychological, but my understanding of psychology is really informed by Jung, and it has a spiritual dimension to it. So I'm coming more to, I don't know how necessarily external this is, or if this is some kind of collective consciousness thing, or more on that level.
Well, it's really hard because there's, each of us has kind of a story we want to be the real story. Right. And sometimes it has to do with, survival of bodily death. Or sometimes it has to do with, other biological entities out there in the universe somewhere. And so we sort of unconsciously lean in that direction. I probably lean, semi-consciously into the direction of survival of bodily death, because to me that is an appealing thought that in some form we continue on. And so I can find a certain amount of reason to go, well, yeah, all this stuff that I'm reading about aliens and near-death experiences and all that stuff maybe seems to suggest there's the existence of a astral body, that, alien abductions are actually out-of-body experiences, as are near-death experiences, and maybe that's the soul, and maybe when you die, that body lives on. But just as easily, that body, the astral body, could die with the physical body. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then I started leaning hard on mediumship and medium phenomenon, and there appears to be some promise there in terms of survival, but it's survival in what state? It's hard to tell. Do you just survive as some weird cosmic, computer file that a medium interprets as a personality and a soul, because that's how they see it, because that's how you relate to people, so that you would when that hologram comes up and it's saying, help us, Obi-Wan, you're our only hope. It seems like a ghost.
Right.
But it might not be.
That's kind of where I stand as a pure agnostic. Like, I don't know. I'm not against the idea of any kind of afterlife whatsoever, but I'm not pro any kind of, me and this current personality that I have is going to transcend this physical body either, because I just don't know. I have no idea.
But don't you think you're so great that you should go on?
I do think I should go on. I think the world deserves me to go on, but I don't think I don't know that necessarily means I will.
This is something the universe needs.
I think for me, in my personal faith, that I do believe that we do go on. But that's my personal faith. I really can't quantify that to anyone else. It's just kind of like this is what I believe, and that's it. I think most people really got to know, they got to have some kind of experience, and that's what informs them.
Have you had that experience?
I have had strange things happen. Yeah. A lot of stuff happened when I was a kid. That was weird. Like I saw an old lady in my room, which was interesting because my father had lived in that house before, and my aunt, his sister, had seen the same old lady 30 years before. So there was there was a validation there. I'd seen when I was a kid, I saw something in my doorway. I had what I believe was a sleep paralysis experience where basically I had been trying to get to the light to turn it on, and I tried to crawl towards the light, the light switch, not like, a near-death experience.
Not a DMT trip.
Right.
Yeah.
Crawl towards to the light switch, and as soon as I touched it, I woke up in my bed. And I told that story to someone on another podcast, and they put it in a light that I had never even thought of it before as an out-of-body experience. So I have had strange things happen to me. In my adult life, it's like nothing.
Right.
Just for some reason, it was all when I was a child and in my early teens. But other than that, there's just pretty much just my faith and in that there is a life after death, and that's pretty much it. There's no real personal. I don't have. Well, I guess you could say that is a personal experience. I'm not so sure how much it really informs that, my belief, if that makes sense.
But isn't it fair, if you had that experience, to let that influence your I mean, you can call it a belief system or an overall suspicion about the nature of reality.
Yeah.
I mean, it gets tough when we play on the battlefield of materialism and we play on the game board of laboratory experimentation, which is only going to get us so far, and
right.
And so much of being human is experience and experiences that don't sort of have their gold standard in a laboratory.
Right.
And that's not taking anything away from what occurs in a laboratory. I certainly hope that something in a laboratory cures cancer one day, because God knows I'm probably going to get it. But that's only that's a part of the reality that we experience, but it's not the only part. And if you're not allowed to say, hey, I had an experience, whether it's paranormal or whether it's creative or romantic or whatever it is, mm-hmm. and that's important and that's real in so much as a thing like that is real, then of course, because listen, no one's going to question a skeptic or a debunker saying, I've never experienced anything. Well, when they say that, it carries a certain amount of weight, but doesn't the opposite carry weight?
And it's funny that you say that too, because I will hear people say, I've never really experienced anything weird, but there is that one time, and then they will tell you something that is completely off the wall.
Yeah, I would say it's more the exception that someone has no strange experiences.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and you got to take into account too that our perceptions are so incredibly limited. You know, the amount of the visible spectrum that we can see and sense and interact with is a tiny percentage of what is there. I mean, science has proven that, you know, and so like you take that into account, and then you take into account the number of people that you experience in a day-to-day life that have had some kind of weird anomalous kind of a experience. And it's out there, you know, we all, like, most of us have had something that we can't just explain away. Can't just say this was this or this was that or this was me being tired or me, you know, whatever. And it's bizarre.
And I actually think there's a human impulse to explain it away. I think there's, unlike what often gets said, I don't think people embellish experiences as much as they play them down and often forget them.
Yeah, try to fit them into their view of the world.
Certainty is a lot easier to deal with.
But that's human biology. I mean, that is the way our brains work. Our brains are filters. We filter out what is not necessary to our survival.
Right.
And our brains still work that way. And
unless you're on mushrooms.
Will often, right.
And then you're experiencing all of it.
Well, yeah. Well, but it's funny because that is a theory. A theory is of a drug, lifting the lid off and allowing a view or some sort of action. And if you're Jeffrey Kripal, he will talk about how a sexual experience and how certain kinds of, tantric practices, those are coming from a belief that in a moment of sexual ecstasy, a filter gets lifted, and for a brief moment, a portal is opened to a greater reality, or something else. So it's not so much that the sex causes it, but by bringing something in, but it actually, again, it moves the curtain away, and so for a brief moment you can see what's behind it.
I can see that.
So I mean, those are theories too, ways of lifting the filter. So, is the drug adding or is it taken away?
I've always kind of looked at it as the altered states, an altered state, whether that's done through meditation or drugs or tantra, whatever it is, that's the doorway to communicating with these entities, whatever they are.
Right.
I've often thought that's key. And I think, the alien abduction phenomenon, as I've said many times on the show, alien contact, experiencers, whatever you want to call it, that people are going into that altered state. Because now you're seeing that there are people that, it used to be the classic one. They're like, well, they took me into the spacecraft and they did all kinds of tests and they took me back. But now people report that they'll have a spouse right next to them and they're physically there in the room. And that's the same as, the ayahuasca experiencer down in South America. He's there in that space and no one has left physically.
Well, I often wonder about that. I'm sure you have done more reading than I have, but
I don't know about that.
well, okay. So here's my question: like an alien abduction experience, it comes out of nowhere and is unexpected by the conscious mind, right? I mean, if you just taken at face value, it is something that happens out of nowhere. Now, when you ingest ayahuasca or DMT, part of your conscious mind knows that you're doing it and knows what might happen. And I'm really questioning how that frames the experience, or if it frames the experience. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe you have the experience and you completely forget your conscious intentions. And then when the drug, washes away, you come back to yourself. What's your reading?
I would have to say that I don't think you can predict something that intense or powerful. I've never done ayahuasca, but I have done DMT a number of times, And it's the same kind of thing. Like you go into it and there's no way you could predict what you're going to experience. A lot of people do say you should go into it with a question or something that you want to kind of get answers to, and maybe you'll get what you want or sort of kind of thing. But there's no way that you're going to be able to prepare for what's going to happen when you're on that kind of an intense hallucination. There's no way that you can prep your mind for it. Like you're not gonna experience what you think you're going to experience.
Yeah, my understanding is that it's not like, say, psilocybin or LSD, where you can have a bad trip because your conscious mind is trying to hang on, and you're fighting it. There's just no. It totally takes control.
It rips all of that away from you. Yeah.
In other words, you are not managing what's happening. You are not in control.
The rational part of your mind. Yeah.
Well, I unfortunately haven't heard you tell the story before, but what, is there a story of DMT that, and your experience on it that you can share with me?
Let's hear it, Rob.
We all want to hear this.
Let me think of a good one. There was a whole summer of I call it the summer of DMT.
Summer of DMT.
Rob, summer of DMT.
You can make an album, dude.
It was.
We need to make a movie about this.
It was 1982. America was falling in love with a band
right.
called REO Speedwagon.
It was somewhere in the early 2000s, but we still loved REO Speedwagon. No, it's I don't know. It was it's very much it takes you unawares and it hits you so fast, and it feels like it's doing to you what it wants to do to you. It genuinely feels like this external force is taking you into its arms and showing you what it wants and providing you what it thinks you needs, kind of a thing. It's I don't know how to explain it other than that. Is it almost like
dream logic?
If you don't let go of control the moment that it hits you, you'll panic and freak the hell out, and it's horrible. The first thing that you do when you enter like that kind of a mindset is you release control of everything, and I don't know, it's crazy.
Rob, did it feel like a choice to release control? Like you could have?
Yes, there was actually a physical moment where I had to remind myself that my body will breathe without me thinking about breathing, which was terrifying. But once you moved past that veil and just let go completely, it was crazy.
Yeah.
It's funny because it does sound like, most alien encounters are very passive. People are not in control. They're going to get examined. They're going to get taken aboard the ship. And as regardless of what their feelings are, they are not able to direct the action.
Yeah. Here's another.
It's funny. It sounds. That and the part where it sort of it defies language, which of course is the title of one of Greg Bishop's books.
Yeah.
And these are naturally occurring chemicals in the brain.
Right.
But
DMT is
very similar
but is it
to
getting
DMT.
triggered? In other words, like you're ingesting it, so you're experiencing it. But in a near-death experience, for instance, does something happen to a person physically or emotionally or psychologically that provokes a dump of DMT from the pituitary gland, or the pineal gland, that then leads to a similar experience?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, it's very possible that it does. And if that's it, then I'm okay with that. Honestly.
Well, and just any of these kind of
okay, so you're gonna sign off on that. Okay, good.
Any of this kind of phenomenon. I think people. I'm not a total skeptic, but like I said, I don't know how external a lot of this may be, and I feel like a lot of us forget that every night when we lose our waking consciousness, we have whole, things play out in our mind. We have encounters with other, quote unquote, other things, beings, people, scenes in our dreams, and have an entirely different experience. And I think a lot of people really discount and aren't really thinking about what happens every single night. We have an entirely different experience, and we encounter things that seem like they have independent intelligence, but they're
and
just,
we are passive.
Yeah,
we are passive in those dreams.
That
for the
dream
most
logic,
part,
it just kind of flows
until you get into lucid dreaming,
right?
And a practice in which you can learn to bring the conscious mind into dreaming, which kind of is what we've been talking about for the last couple of minutes anyway.
There's another aspect too that has to do with occultism that I've found similar to what we've been talking about with the alien abduction phenomena, where and in shamanism as well, where you will hear people that have gone through like these shamanistic initiations or ayahuasca, where they are basically torn apart and put back together. So there's a similarity between that, the aliens coming and get you and basically tearing into you, violating your body, and then this other spiritual phenomenon where you are torn apart and put back together. And then you're able to go on to kind of like the next level. Have you seen a film called A Dark Song? It's actually on Netflix right now. I would recommend that because there are parts of it that are very unsettling, but it's basically a depiction of one of the rituals I think that Crowley did. I can't even remember the name of it now, but essentially that's almost essentially what happens in that film.
Cool. I want to see that.
Yeah. So we've been some deep territory. Have you ever had any weird experiences yourself?
None at all. And for the first part of my life, I was really upset about that. And I was going to go out and, sleep in a haunted house or, try to invoke it in some way. And I'd probably say in the last 10 years, I've kind of done a 180 on that. And I've kind of come to realize, you know what, if it hasn't happened, maybe there's a reason, maybe there's a good reason, and maybe I'm okay with that.
It's usually
I'll be
not
an
fun.
armchair, paranormal investigator, because most people who talk about it, it's not like, oh my God, the greatest experience ever. Sometimes it's really good. Not so great. Yeah, it's not so great. So
yes, there's certain that movie I was telling you about. There's certain aspects of that are in that film. Is there anything that you're working on now that is kind of similar to Mothman Prophecies? Because I know that you really are into all this material. Have you thought of doing another film that is kind of similar in vein? Maybe take it to kind of another level.
Well, you know what's funny? About a year ago, I met on. I had some meetings to possibly do a show for National Geographic, and it's about Project Blue Book.
Oh,
I'm sorry, it's for the History Channel. I'm sorry, I misstated that. And I was like, oh, this is great. I mean, that's a really cool era, and it's going to focus on J. Allen Hynek. It didn't work out. They went ahead. They're making it anyway. Hopefully, it'll be out pretty soon. But I thought that might be a really interesting way to deal with someone. Because to me, the story of J. Allen Hynek was really interesting. Someone who went from a very, very scientific, skeptical, literally professional debunker, all the way to the other side. To wait a second, whoa, this isn't all bullshit. There is something going on. I don't know what, but it is worth looking at, and it's far stranger than we think it is. And stories like that always interest me. I'm not working on anything like that currently, although I will say that some friends of mine have said, okay, now that you made the movie of the Mothman Prophecies, why not do a TV show where you literally do like John Keel's life? Do every last thing that ever happened in the Mothman Prophecies, do all the Men in Black, all the weird stuff, and just, do a deep dive into the actual story and make it go 13 or 25 episodes. And there that seems interesting, but again, there's a part of me that's like, God, besides me and you guys and Greg Bishop, who's going to watch that? You know.
Well, I mean, CBS
So I don't know.
just put out that series about Jack Parsons.
Right.
So I think
Oh,
there is a market for this stuff. I mean, I definitely think that this whole aspect to this phenomenon is becoming more and more popular, because you already have with like the Tom DeLonge has come out, and that whole group has started to say that we're probably not dealing with extraterrestrials anymore. We're dealing with interdimensionals. That's the whole new thing. Right. So that this new way of thinking about this phenomenon has gotten really popular lately.
Yeah, I want to check out the Parsons show. I'm very interested to see how they approach it.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, most of the stuff I work on now is, you know, genre oriented one way or another. There's something supernatural about it. Maybe not in the way that we've been talking, maybe more, you know, straightforward genre stuff. But I don't know. You never know what's around the corner. I certainly don't. I'm always going from job to job. So we'll see what comes up next.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to keep following your work. Richard, thank you.
Oh, that's so nice, you guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a marathon tonight.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man.
We covered a lot of ground. We're going to close this section out, but stay on the line for us. And guys, we'll be right back.
Let me just really quickly
say
thank you for having me on. This has been great. I hope people are listening to this late at night on a drive out to Joshua Tree. That's the proper way.
Well, what is your website if anybody wants to get in touch with you or see what you're doing?
You know, I don't have a website, but I've got a Twitter handle, so definitely hit me up on Twitter, and it's really simple. It's Richard Hatem at Richard Hatem.
Excellent.
And is there anything else you'd like to promote that's coming out or you're working on or you can talk about?
I'm working on a show called Titans, which is a live action adult drama based on Teen Titans.
Okay.
Which is, you guys may have, you know, in either if you have kids or you remember, you know, Robin and Starfire and Beast Boy and Raven.
Yep. Oh yeah.
But this is a live action, you know, beautifully produced and wildly entertaining 13 episode show that's going to debut on DC Universe, which is DC's streaming platform, which will debut, I think, in October of 2018. So if it's out there, it's a subscriber service, but definitely subscribe because this is some next level TV stuff that is really, really fun. I think you'll enjoy it.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, stay on the line for us, and guys, we'll be right back to close out the show on Conspirinormal.
We're going to discuss Rob's DMT experience.
Yeah,
patrons.
We need to know a little bit about this. This is another one of those things with Rob where in the beginning,
by the way,
the beginning of this show, when he first started, he's like, "You ever had anything weird happen to you?" No, not really. And then just slowly, you know, talking, having full conversations with disembodied entities, and then, I had this whole summer of DMT. So we're real curious about this because neither one of us has done this. So you have.
I think everyone should do it. That's my stance. It's okay. When you hear people talk about near-death experiences, and you know, I saw the light, and this or this happened, and that's a DMT trip. That's all it is. Is your body releasing DMT into it. But if you just smoke it, then you don't have to almost die, and you can still experience that. So what's the downside?
I've heard that it is like when you wake up from a dream, like your dream or sleep reality compared to this one, like that the DMT trip is like you're waking up into a more awake feeling, like you're more conscious than now. Like this is the sleep. Like it's
That
more
your waking
real.
life is your sleep.
Yeah, like it's more real than this is.
The first, basically, whenever I've done it, like the first 5 minutes, you just basically lay down and your body like goes away and you have no control over anything. Like you're not at a party like walking around having a good time talking to like you're laid out. Like I remember being at my friend's house and being like, okay, I want to be less than 5 spaces away from a patch of grass that has no dog poop in it because I'm just going to collapse. And after that, you get up and there's like a 20, 30-minute period of that's what you feel is like this afterglow kind of super alert, super like you realize entirely that you are a part of the universe. I don't know how else to explain that. Like you are like, everything about you is a part of the universal system and you totally comprehend your role in that system for about 15 or 20 minutes. And it's just
Similar to a lot of other psychedelics, yeah.
yeah, it's this but like times 10.
Different.
Whereas I can't remember who explained it this way, but maybe it was Aldous Huxley. He was like, you know, where LSD pokes like pinholes in the curtain of reality, DMT tears the curtain down.
Probably Terrence McKenna. I don't think Aldous Huxley did DMT. But
Yeah, okay. It was probably Terrence McKenna, but yeah, super intense, but super short.
Wow.
And you were asking me during the break if I ever
the elves.
the machine elves. No, I never. I don't remember any kind of entities ever.
What about becoming inanimate objects or anything like that? I've heard of experiences like that with salvia.
No, like I said, my body was just this like thing that didn't matter.
Yeah.
My body was laying on the ground, and I left it there, and it was fine.
Did your consciousness? Did you have some sense of who?
It was very much
are?
almost an out of body experience every time.
Did you feel like your personality though was like what it is now, as far as like you felt like you were this one thing, and you had some kind of connection to what you perceive yourself as now, like you are Rob? Because I've heard of people having these experiences where they kind of get depersonalized or can become another object or are something else, or
that's kind of what I meant by like
things.
like you it's almost not your body doesn't die, but like you're just like you get to this point where you're like, okay, that's just this stupid like nasty physical organic thing that's carrying me around, and
yeah,
you just kind of leave it laying on the ground and your brain does its thing, but
you feel like one separate thing though.
But then you totally recognize your how you interact with the universe, like what your role is with the universe and how vast this giant system is and how tiny of like a little gear in it you are.
It's like you're in an over consciousness.
Yeah. Oh, it's totally just you can't process the information that's coming in. It's coming so fast.
Don't do drugs, kids.
Yeah, no. We Conspirinormal does not condone the use of drugs.
Rob was much younger.
This is back in the day.
He's not on DMT now that we know of.
There may be some lingering LSD.
Maybe we can do a Patreon episode alive.
Yeah, that's kind of what Rob's goal is to do one.
Yeah, we're gonna get Adam to trip on
mushrooms.
Okay, maybe we can get
Oh
that
my God.
random word generator in here.
Yeah. Joe will probably like start sprouting like flowers from his face, and I'll start freaking
This would be
out.
a nice safe environment to do some mushrooms though. Just
it's true.
me, you, and Sir Fael and Luke.
Oh,
no.
I don't know if you want Luke to.
I definitely want Luke.
Speaking of
My
Luke,
psychonaut days are over.
we were streaming live, and someone did say that they missed Luke. But from Luke Skyrider's Facebook, this is where he is right now. I gotta pull it back up because they hate it when they do that. So Luke says, if you're a metalhead and you're not here at Shadow of Intent, Aversions, Flesh God, Whitechapel, and Black Dahlia, you're a poser.
Yeah. I'll just be a poser then.
That's the message from Luke. I ran into him today, and he said, "Man, I'm going to go see Black Dolly or Murder, dude." Like, I was like, "Well, we got the podcast tonight. If you want to come." "No, I'm not going to miss that, man. Like, if I broke both my legs, I'd still be there in the pit."
I don't know any of those bands.
You ever heard of Version, dude?
I think I saw Luke wear their t-shirt once.
I went to a metal show with Luke one time.
Oh yeah, he told me.
And I don't remember the name of the band again.
Origin, you said.
Origin, yeah, that's right.
Okay,
That's right.
technical death metal band.
And I'm like, the pit is going on, and I'm kind of off to the side, and I just got my hands in my pocket. And the guy points at me, and he says, "You right there, standing there with your hands in the pocket. You're part of the problem." So Luke looks at me and says, "Man, that's cool. You got called out by the band, dude." And I'm like, "Great." All right. There was some other things I wanted to talk about. We got so deep into with Richard that I kind of just want to end the show here. Thanks to Surfiel, we have a new theme song.
Yes, sir.
Which is really awesome.
And if you want to get your own copy of that without the samples, I think we're going to be putting that up on Patreon as well.
Yep. Great. Sounds good. All right, guys. We will be adjourning back tomorrow night for another episode of Conspirinormal Chapstick. This to me is like the really fascinating material.
We don't know what the answer is, but we're looking for patterns.
I think we're looking at kind of a type of cosmic alchemy.
The story slowly grew into business.
But still, a lot of people don't know that this technology actually exists.
The possibilities here are pretty
We
mind-boggling.
can't just believe that it was the work of these lone troubled individuals.
And like a conspiracy theorist would look at that and say, well, the Illuminati or somebody planned this right
Now, is
away
that
in advance.
or is that by design?
Because there is an ancient site there, or were these ancient sites built on places of power?
We're getting into bizarre areas of relationships that you really have to invest the time to start peeling back the onion.
Do you remember the goat?
I don't remember the goat. No.
No, I think that
Definitely secret societies. Because their knowledge they are preserving of us.
what you had there was the detonation of a 15 megaton cosmic missile. Bring me a cookie.